March 16, 1945. British engineers ignite smoke generators along a 66-mile stretch of the Rhine River. Within hours, a man-made fog denser than any natural weather phenomenon blankets the entire area. German commanders on the opposite bank can't see what's happening. They hear engines, movement, preparations, but see nothing. For 8 days, this artificial cloud conceals 1.25 million Allied soldiers, 5,500 artillery pieces, tanks, bridging equipment, and the largest river-crossing operation in modern warfare. When the smoke finally clears and Operation Plunder begins, Germans realize too late that an entire army has assembled right under their noses. This is the true story of the world record smokescreen that blinded an enemy for over a week, the rejected smoke technology that made it possible, and how a simple chemical trick changed the endgame of World War II in Europe. Stay until the end to discover what modern militaries learned from this massive deception. By early March 1945, Nazi Germany's defeat was inevitable but not yet complete. Soviet armies advanced from the east, crushing German resistance through Poland and East Prussia, racing toward Berlin. From the west, American, British, and Canadian forces had liberated France, Belgium, and Luxembourg, pursuing retreating German armies to Germany's borders. But one massive natural obstacle remained: the Rhine River. The Rhine is one of Europe's great rivers, flowing over 800 miles from the Swiss Alps to the North Sea. Along much of the German frontier, it runs wide, deep, and fast, an ideal defensive barrier. Throughout history, armies that controlled Rhine crossings controlled Central Europe. Julius Caesar bridged the Rhine in 55 BC to intimidate Germanic tribes. Napoleon's campaigns hinged on Rhine control. Now, in 1945, the river represented Germany's last hope of slowing the Allied juggernaut. Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery, commanding the British 21st Army Group, planned the main Allied assault across the Rhine. His designated crossing point was near Wesel, where the Rhine ran broad but crossable with proper preparation. Montgomery's plan, codenamed Operation Plunder, would involve 3 armies: the British Second Army under Lieutenant General Miles Dempsey, the United States Ninth Army under Lieutenant General William Simpson, and the 1st Canadian Army. The operational challenges were enormous. The Rhine at Wesel measured over 300 yards wide in most places, with strong currents capable of sweeping away pontoon bridges. The eastern bank rose in places to commanding heights that German defenders had fortified with bunkers, trenches, and artillery positions. German forces, though depleted, retained the 1st Parachute Army under General Alfred Schlemm, considered the most effective remaining German formation in the region. Intelligence indicated Germans had concentrated anti-aircraft batteries around Wesel, threatening both river crossings and the planned airborne assault, Operation Varsity, scheduled to drop British 6th Airborne Division and U.S. 17th Airborne Division beyond the Rhine to secure bridgeheads. The Luftwaffe, though a shadow of its former strength, could still contest Allied air operations in concentrated attacks. Most critically, Germans knew the Allies would cross the Rhine near Wesel. The geography, road networks, and strategic objectives made this location obvious. What Germans couldn't know was exactly when and precisely where along the riverfront the main assaults would occur. Montgomery needed to concentrate overwhelming force at specific crossing points while keeping Germans uncertain about Allied intentions. He needed the element of tactical surprise despite strategic inevitability. He needed to hide an army in plain sight. The solution came from a technology many senior Allied commanders had initially dismissed: military smoke generation. Since World War I, armies had used smoke screens tactically, brief clouds to cover advancing infantry or obscure specific targets. But the concept of strategic smoke screening, maintaining continuous artificial fog over dozens of miles for days or weeks, seemed impractical to many traditional military minds. American chemical warfare specialists had developed mechanical smoke generators, devices that burned special petroleum-based smoke oil to produce dense white clouds. These generators could operate continuously, fed by drums of smoke oil, and required only occasional maintenance. When multiple generators operated together, they created an artificial fog that could blanket entire areas. But several problems limited their acceptance. First, smoke generation consumed enormous quantities of smoke oil. A single generator might burn through 20 to 30 gallons per hour. Operating hundreds of generators for days would require tens of thousands of gallons of specialized chemicals. Logistics officers balked at the supply requirements. Second, smoke operations were weather-dependent. Wind could disperse smoke screens quickly, requiring constant adjustment of generator positions and output. Third, many commanders simply didn't believe smoke screens could be maintained reliably enough for operational purposes. General George Patton exemplified this skepticism. When planning his Third Army's Rhine crossing near Oppenheim, south of Montgomery's position, Patton deliberately rejected smoke screens. He believed in speed and audacity, not elaborate technical preparations. Patton intended to bounce the Rhine, cross quickly before Germans could react, relying on tactical surprise achieved through aggressive movement rather than elaborate deception.
British chemical warfare specialists, however, had extensively tested American smoke generators and reached different conclusions. They recognized that with proper planning, sufficient supply allocation, and favorable weather patterns, continuous smoke screens were entirely feasible. The Rhine Valley's geography and typical spring weather patterns actually favored sustained smoke operations. Prevailing winds generally blew from west to east, carrying smoke across the river toward German positions. Temperature inversions common in river valleys would trap smoke near the ground, maximizing its effectiveness. Colonel John Dewing of British Chemical Warfare Service championed smoke screening for Operation Plunder. He argued that smoke could conceal the massive preparations Montgomery required: accumulation of bridging materials, positioning of thousands of artillery pieces, and assembly of assault troops. If Germans couldn't observe Allied buildup, they couldn't accurately predict where main assaults would occur. Smoke would force Germans to defend evenly along the entire front rather than concentrating at actual crossing points. Montgomery, known for meticulous planning and overwhelming force concentration, understood strategic value immediately. He authorized the most ambitious smoke operation ever attempted, a continuous screen along the entire 21st Army Group front, from the British sector near Emmerich down to the U.S. 9th Army sector south of Wesel, approximately 66 miles. The operation would begin March 16th, a week before the planned crossing on March 23rd, and continue through the assault. It would require unprecedented coordination between British and American smoke companies, continuous supply operations, and careful weather monitoring. Planning the 66-mile smoke screen required solving complex technical and logistical problems. British and American chemical warfare officers worked together, mapping generator positions, calculating smoke oil requirements, and coordinating supply routes. The scale was unprecedented. No military operation had ever attempted continuous smoke generation over such distances for extended periods. First, they mapped the riverfront topography in detail. Generators had to be positioned to create overlapping smoke coverage, accounting for terrain variations, wind patterns, and German observation points. Areas with natural fog formation, low ground near streams, wooded areas that trap moisture required fewer generators. Exposed areas on high ground needed denser generator deployment to ensure consistent coverage. Second, supply calculations were staggering. Each generator consumed approximately 25 gallons of smoke oil per hour. Operating 200 generators continuously for 8 days would require over 900,000 gallons of smoke oil. This had to be manufactured, transported from supply depots in England and France, and distributed to generator positions along the Rhine front. Tank trucks moved constantly, shuttling between supply dumps and forward positions. Third, personnel requirements were substantial. Each generator needed operators to maintain fuel supply, monitor output, adjust position based on wind changes, and perform mechanical maintenance. British and American smoke companies, specialized engineering units trained in chemical warfare equipment, were concentrated for Operation Plunder. Over 5,000 personnel would be dedicated to smoke operations alone. Fourth, communications infrastructure had to link all smoke positions with central control. Telephone lines were laid connecting generator positions to smoke control headquarters, which monitored meteorological conditions and coordinated adjustments. When wind shifted direction or speed, orders went out to increase or decrease generator output, move specific generators, or adjust fuel mixture to change smoke density. The generators themselves were relatively simple but robust machines. Most common were the M1 mechanical smoke generator, essentially a large pot-bellied stove with a forced air blower. Smoke oil dripped into a heated chamber where it vaporized, and the blower expelled dense white clouds through a discharge pipe. Variations included vehicle-mounted generators for mobile operations and larger static generators for sustained area coverage. Smoke oil itself was a specially formulated petroleum product. When heated and vaporized, it condensed in cool air into microscopic droplets that scattered light effectively, creating dense white clouds. The oil was non-toxic and dissipated naturally without environmental harm. Different formulations produced different smoke characteristics. Some created thicker but shorter lasting clouds, others produced thinner but more persistent screens.
By March 15, 1945, everything was ready. Generators sat in carefully surveyed positions. Supply dumps held hundreds of thousands of gallons of smoke oil. Operators stood by their equipment. Meteorological officers predicted favorable conditions for the coming week. Montgomery gave the order. Operation Plunder's smokescreen would begin at dawn on March 16th. March 16, 1945, 0600 hours. Along 66 miles of Rhine River front, operators turned valves and ignited smoke generators. Within minutes, white clouds began billowing from hundreds of sources. As the sun rose, it illuminated not the Rhine Valley, but an impenetrable wall of white that stretched north to south as far as anyone could see. German observers on the Rhine's eastern bank watched in amazement as their view simply disappeared. One moment they could see across the river to Allied positions. The next moment, an artificial fog thicker than any natural weather phenomenon completely obscured everything. Through binoculars and telescopes, German intelligence officers could see nothing, just endless white. The smokescreen had begun. British newspapers and the Army newspaper Soldier quickly reported the operation, describing it as a man-made 66-mile fog. The sheer scale impressed everyone. This wasn't tactical smoke to cover specific movements. This was strategic smoke that changed the operational environment completely. German radio intercepts revealed confusion and concern. They knew something large was being prepared behind that smoke wall, but couldn't determine what or where. The smokescreen's psychological impact on German defenders was significant. Soldiers manning defensive positions along the Rhine found themselves staring at an impenetrable wall day after day. They heard engines, vehicle movements, metallic clanking that might be tanks or bridging equipment, occasional artillery fire, but saw nothing. It was nerve-wracking and disorienting. Where would the attack come? When would it start? How large would it be? The smokescreen prevented answers. Behind the smokescreen, Allied preparations accelerated dramatically. Knowing Germans couldn't observe their movements, Allied forces worked openly during daylight hours instead of restricting major activities to darkness. This vastly increased work efficiency. Bridging materials moved forward to staging areas, artillery pieces rolled into pre-surveyed positions, ammunition dumps grew, assault troops rehearsed crossing techniques on nearby rivers. The logistics were staggering. The Ninth Army alone stockpiled 138,000 tons of supplies. Overall, over 60,000 British and American engineers participated in preparations. 5,500 artillery pieces, anti-tank guns, anti-aircraft guns, and rocket projectors were positioned. 36 Royal Navy landing craft, transported overland from the coast, arrived at the Rhine, ready for assault operations. Montgomery's staff implemented elaborate deception measures beyond the smokescreen. Dummy installations were constructed in areas away from actual crossing points, complete with fake radio traffic and vehicle movement to suggest troop concentrations.
Real and dummy operations combined with smokescreen created maximum confusion. German intelligence faced impossible challenges determining Allied intentions. Coordinated artillery fire and patrol activities added to deception. Each day, different sectors would receive concentrated shelling or aggressive patrol activities, suggesting those might be assault sectors, but attacks never came. Germans couldn't tell which activities were real preparations and which were diversions. The smokescreen prevented visual confirmation of any intelligence conclusions. Civilians living near the Rhine were evacuated for security. Railheads pushed forward to minimize supply line exposure. New roads were constructed to handle the enormous traffic volumes. Over 800,000 maps were printed for 9th Army units alone. Every detail was planned meticulously. And throughout, the smokescreen continued, day after day, concealing everything. While Germans stared helplessly at the smoke wall, Allied forces assembled the largest river-crossing operation since D-Day. The accumulation of combat power behind that artificial fog was extraordinary. 1.25 million soldiers concentrated in assembly areas. Tank battalions moved into forward positions, tracks clanking on cobblestone roads. Infantry units conducted final briefings in farmhouses and barns. The artillery park was particularly impressive. 5,500 guns of all types, field artillery, medium artillery, heavy artillery, anti-aircraft guns adapted for ground targets, rocket projectors, were positioned in carefully surveyed positions with precisely calculated firing data for German defensive positions on the Rhine's eastern bank. The massed artillery would fire the largest preparatory bombardment since the Western Front in World War I. Amphibious vehicles arrived in quantities that astonished even veterans of Normandy landings. American DUKWs, six-wheel-drive amphibious trucks called ducks, could carry 25 troops or cargo from land into water and across rivers. British Buffaloes, tracked amphibious vehicles originally designed for Pacific operations, carried 30 troops plus equipment through water and over soft ground. These vehicles would transport assault waves across the Rhine while German guns were still suppressed by artillery fire. Bridging equipment accumulated in staggering quantities. Engineers prepared to construct multiple bridges across the Rhine immediately after assault waves secured bridgeheads. Pontoon sections, anchors, cables, boats, and all materials needed for rapid bridge construction sat ready. One American unit would set a record by constructing a floating bridge measuring 1,152 feet, almost a quarter mile, in just 6 hours and 15 minutes. The 79th Armored Division brought specialized vehicles developed specifically for obstacle crossing. Churchill armored ramp vehicles could drive into ditches and streams, providing mobile bridges. AVREs, Armored Vehicles Royal Engineers, carried fascines and bridges able to cross anti-tank ditches while under fire. These funnies, proven in Normandy, would again demonstrate their value. Aircraft assembled at forward airfields. Transport planes and gliders for Operation Varsity, the airborne assault, gathered at bases across England and France. Fighter bombers prepared for close air support missions. Heavy bombers would contribute by devastating whistle immediately before the river crossing, suppressing German defenses through overwhelming firepower. Through all this preparation, the smokescreen continued without interruption. When wind conditions shifted, operators adjusted generator positions and output. When specific sectors needed clearer smoke coverage, additional generators were brought forward. The screen became so routine that soldiers nicknamed it Montgomery's fog, a weather phenomenon that seemed as permanent as the Rhine itself. German intelligence worked desperately to penetrate the smokescreen. Reconnaissance aircraft attempted overflights, but Allied fighters intercepted most. Artillery spotters tried ranging shots across the river, attempting to deduce Allied positions from where return fire originated. But Allied counter-battery fire destroyed German observation posts rapidly. Agents and spies behind Allied lines were systematically captured by security services. Every German attempt to gather intelligence failed against the smokescreen. The smokescreen's impact extended beyond physical concealment. It became a powerful psychological weapon that wore down German morale and confidence. For soldiers manning defensive positions along the Rhine, staring day after day at an impenetrable white wall while hearing ominous sounds from within it, created profound anxiety and stress. German commanders faced impossible decisions. They knew approximately where Allied forces were concentrating. The smokescreen itself indicated general areas, but they couldn't determine specific crossing points. Should they concentrate forces at likely sectors, accepting weakness elsewhere? Or spread defenses evenly across the entire front, ensuring inadequate strength everywhere? The smokescreen prevented informed decisions. General Alfred Schlemm, commanding German 1st Parachute Army, was an experienced and capable officer. His troops, though depleted from previous battles in the Reichswald and Battle of the Bulge, remained motivated and disciplined. But Schlemm lacked reserves, air support, and adequate artillery. Most critically, he lacked intelligence about where main Allied attacks would occur. The smokescreen had effectively blinded his entire army. Schlemm's intelligence officers compiled reports from all sources. Prisoner interrogations suggested massive buildup but provided no specific operational details. Radio intercepts picked up increased communications, but clever Allied security prevented useful information from being transmitted. Artillery spotters reported seeing nothing through the smoke. Reconnaissance aircraft that survived Allied fighters photographed nothing but clouds. Every intelligence source came back empty. The Germans also faced technical challenges analyzing smoke itself. Their chemical warfare specialists determined Allied smoke was petroleum-based oil smoke, not chemical weapons. But knowing composition didn't help predict where attacks would come. Some German officers theorized smoke was heaviest at planned crossing points, trying to deduce Allied intentions from smoke density variations. Others argued smoke was thickest away from crossing points to draw attention from actual assault sectors. Without observation, theories remained just theories. German propaganda attempted to minimize smokescreen significance. Radio broadcasts claimed it demonstrated Allied weakness, suggesting they feared German defenses so much they needed artificial fog to hide behind. Newspapers printed articles about how smoke prevented Allied pilots from supporting ground operations, turning the screen into an Allied disadvantage. But German soldiers along the Rhine weren't fooled. They understood they were blind and their enemy wasn't. Some German units attempted aggressive patrol activities, crossing the Rhine at night to probe Allied positions. Most patrols were intercepted and destroyed by alert Allied security forces. A few penetrated far enough to observe massed supplies and equipment, but by the time patrol survivors returned with reports, the intelligence was already outdated. Allied dispositions changed continuously behind the smokescreen. As days passed, German anxiety increased. By March 20th, the smoke had been continuous for 4 days. March 21st, 5 days. March 22nd, 6 days. Each day brought Germans closer to the inevitable assault, but they still couldn't determine exactly where it would fall. The psychological pressure was immense. Soldiers became jumpy, firing at shadows and sounds. Officers grew increasingly frustrated at their inability to gather basic tactical intelligence. March 23, 1945, 1700 hours. The smokescreen had been operating for 7 days. Behind it, Allied forces completed final preparations. Assault troops moved to their assembly areas. Artillery crews loaded ammunition. Engineers checked equipment one last time. Amphibious vehicle drivers started engines, letting them warm up. The long-awaited moment approached. At exactly 1800 hours, the preparatory bombardment began. 5,500 Allied guns fired simultaneously. The noise was deafening, described by witnesses as sounding like the world ending. British bombers contributed by devastating whistle with concentrated attacks. The city essentially ceased to exist, reduced to rubble by overwhelming firepower. German defenders who survived the bombardment were stunned and deafened.
The artillery barrage continued for 4 hours. During this time, assault units moved to their launch points under cover of both smoke and darkness. The smokescreen, which had concealed preparation, now concealed deployment. German forces taking shelter from the bombardment couldn't see Allied troops moving to attack positions even if they had looked. At 2100 hours, the first assault waves entered the Rhine. The 51st Highland Division led the British sector, with the 7th Battalion Black Watch embarking in buffaloes northeast of Calcar. These tracked amphibious vehicles drove down to the water's edge, entered the river without stopping, and swam across toward the eastern bank. Behind them, more buffaloes carried the 7th Battalion, Argyll and Sutherland Highlanders. The crossing took less than 3 minutes for the lead vehicles, though it seemed longer to the soldiers crouched inside. German artillery fire was erratic and largely ineffective. Weeks of Allied counter-battery fire had destroyed or suppressed most German guns. Surviving batteries fired blindly, unable to observe their targets. The smoke, combined with darkness and the massive bombardment's lingering effects, left German defenders unable to coordinate effective resistance. British 12th Corps crossed near Xanten, while 30th Corps crossed at Ries. American 16th Corps of the 9th Army crossed south of the Lippe River. All along the front, assault waves pushed across the Rhine in overwhelming numbers. German defenders fought back where they could, but isolated strongpoints couldn't hold against coordinated attacks supported by massed artillery. The 15th Scottish Division encountered stronger resistance but pushed through with determination. Churchill tanks of the 44th Royal Tank Regiment crossed on pontoon bridges that Royal Engineers constructed with incredible speed, even while under fire. By dawn on March 24th, all assault divisions had secured their initial objectives and were expanding bridgeheads. Operation Varsity, the airborne component, launched on the morning of March 24th. 16,000 paratroopers and Glatterborn troops of the British 6th Airborne Division and U.S. 17th Airborne Division dropped beyond the Rhine to secure key terrain and prevent German reinforcements from reaching the river. Some aircraft and gliders flew through smoke that had drifted east, creating eerie conditions where pilots descended through white clouds into combat zones. March 24, 1945, mid-morning. The smokescreen that had blanketed the Rhine for 8 days was finally lifted. Operators shut down generators as planned. Wind gradually dispersed the artificial fog. For the first time in over a week, Germans on the eastern bank could see the western bank clearly. What they saw horrified them. Bridges already crossed the Rhine at multiple points. Columns of Allied tanks and vehicles streamed across toward bridgeheads. Artillery positions that Germans had been unable to locate for days now stood visible, their guns still firing in support of advancing infantry. The sheer scale of Allied forces was overwhelming. Germans realized they had been completely outmaneuvered and outnumbered without knowing it. German commanders attempted to organize counterattacks, but Allied forces had already secured strong positions. The airborne troops held key terrain behind German front lines, blocking reinforcement routes. Overwhelming Allied air power prevented German movement during daylight. The 1st Parachute Army, already depleted and lacking reserves, couldn't mount effective resistance against such concentrated force. General Schlemm himself was wounded on March 24th, command passing to General Günther Blumentritt. Blumentritt and his superior, General Oberst Johannes Blaskowitz,
Both immediately recognized the situation was hopeless. The front was incomplete, reserves non-existent, artillery weak, air support absent, and tanks few. Communications had broken down so thoroughly that one corps was never contacted during the battle. Both generals decided against feeding reinforcements into a lost battle, choosing to save lives rather than waste them on futile resistance. Joseph Goebbels, Nazi propaganda minister, understood Operation Plunder's implications immediately. His diary entry for March 24 began, "The situation in the West has entered an extraordinarily critical, ostensibly almost deadly phase." He noted the Rhine crossing on a broad front and foresaw Allied encirclement of the Ruhr industrial heartland. The optimistic propaganda his ministry had been broadcasting couldn't obscure the reality that Germany's last major defensive barrier had fallen. Within days, Allied forces pushed deep into Germany. The Ruhr pocket formed as American units advancing from the south met others coming from the north, trapping over 300,000 German troops. The advance toward Berlin and the final collapse of Nazi Germany accelerated dramatically. The Rhine crossing had broken the last organized German defense in the West. The smokescreen's effectiveness became a subject of immediate analysis. Intelligence officers estimated the screen had prevented accurate German intelligence about Allied dispositions throughout the preparation period. This forced Germans to defend the entire front evenly, rather than concentrating at actual crossing points. The result was overwhelming Allied superiority at the points of attack. Captured German officers confirmed the smoke's impact. They reported complete inability to determine Allied intentions. Several stated they expected attacks in different sectors than where they actually occurred, based on limited intelligence gathered through the smoke. The artificial fog had successfully concealed not just activities, but Allied operational plans. The success of Montgomery's smoke-covered Rhine crossing stands in stark contrast to General Patton's crossing at Oppenheim, which deliberately used no smokescreen. Patton's Third Army crossed the Rhine on March 22nd, one day before Montgomery, using speed and audacity rather than elaborate preparation. Patton wanted to beat Montgomery across the Rhine and made sure the press knew about his crossing immediately. Patton's operation succeeded through tactical surprise and aggressive execution, but casualty rates told a different story. The 89th Division, part of Patton's Third Army, crossed the Rhine at Mainz without smoke screens. Casualties were described in unit reports as alarmingly high. German observers could see American troops crossing and directed accurate artillery fire against them. Without smoke to blind German gunners, American soldiers paid in blood. Further south, other American units crossing without smoke screens experienced similar difficulties. The 87th Division crossed at Koblenz under direct German observation. Artillery and machine gun fire from commanding heights on the eastern bank created devastating casualties. Engineers attempting to construct pontoon bridges under fire worked desperately while exposed to German gunners who could see every movement. By comparison, Montgomery's crossings, protected by the massive smoke screen, experienced remarkably light casualties, given the operation's scale. The 51st Highland Division, first to cross, reported fewer than 100 casualties, while capturing over 1,000 prisoners. Other assault divisions similarly reported lower than expected casualties. The smoke had saved thousands of Allied lives by blinding German defenders during the critical assault phase. The contrast wasn't lost on Allied commanders. After-action reports emphasized smoke's effectiveness. Chemical warfare officers received commendations for their planning and execution. The 66-mile smokescreen entered military history textbooks as the largest and most effective use of tactical smoke in warfare. What had been rejected technology to some commanders became recognized as a battle-winning capability. The smokescreen also demonstrated logistical capabilities of Allied forces. Operating 200 generators continuously for 8 days while conducting the largest river crossing since D-Day showed extraordinary organizational competence. Supply lines delivered hundreds of thousands of gallons of smoke oil while simultaneously supplying combat operations. Communications networks coordinated smoke operations across 66 miles of front. The operation required capabilities only the most advanced military organizations possessed.
German military analysts studying the Rhine crossing after the war identified the smokescreen as one of the operation's most effective elements. They noted that without visual intelligence, their commanders made decisions based on assumptions rather than observation. Several stated that if they had been able to observe Allied preparations, they might have withdrawn to more defensible positions rather than attempting to hold the Rhine line. The smoke had operationally blinded an entire army for over a week.
The Rhine crossing smokescreen established principles that influenced military doctrine for decades. It proved that strategic smoke operations, sustained over large areas for extended periods, were not only feasible but decisively effective when properly planned and executed. The concept entered military training and operational planning worldwide. Modern militaries continue using smoke screens, though technologies have evolved. Chemical smoke generators similar to those used at the Rhine remain in service for area coverage. Vehicle-mounted smoke generators provide mobile screening. Smoke grenades and shells give tactical units immediate smoke capabilities. But all trace conceptual lineage to operations like the Rhine crossing that proved smoke's operational value. The rise of thermal imaging and radar changed smoke's effectiveness in some contexts. Thermal imagers can see through visual smoke by detecting heat signatures. Radar penetrates smoke completely. Modern military smoke systems must defeat multiple sensor types, not just human vision. This led to development of multispectral smokes that obscure both visual and infrared wavelengths simultaneously. Smoke's psychological impact remains significant. Even when enemies have thermal imaging, smoke still creates uncertainty and stress. Defenders who can't see attackers through smoke must rely entirely on sensors, which attackers can spoof or destroy. The fog of war becomes literal fog, complicating communications and coordination. Properly used, smoke remains a powerful tool even against advanced opponents. Environmental considerations have changed smoke operations. Early smoke oils, while non-toxic, created temporary visual pollution. Modern smoke formulations are designed for faster dissipation and minimal environmental impact. Regulatory requirements govern smoke use in training exercises. But combat operations still employ smoke screens when tactical advantages outweigh environmental concerns. The Rhine crossing also demonstrated organizational capabilities required for large-scale smoke operations. Coordinating hundreds of generators across 66 miles required robust communications, reliable supply chains, trained personnel, and responsive command structures. These requirements limited which militaries could conduct strategic smoke operations. Only forces with sophisticated logistics and communications could replicate such operations. The operation influenced post-war military engineering doctrine. Chemical warfare units that conducted smoke operations became recognized specialists whose capabilities were essential for major operations. Training programs expanded to cover strategic smoke screening concepts. Equipment improved based on Rhine crossing lessons, with more efficient generators, better fuels, and improved distribution systems. Historians analyzing Operation Plunder consistently identify the smokescreen as a critical success factor. Montgomery's meticulous planning included smoke from the beginning, recognizing its value for operational deception. The smoke enabled the massive buildup that guaranteed overwhelming force at crossing points. Without smoke, such obvious preparations would have revealed Allied intentions, allowing Germans to concentrate defenses and potentially bloody the crossing severely. The contrast between Montgomery's smoke-covered crossing and Patton's non-smoke crossing at Oppenheim became a case study in military schools. Both operations succeeded strategically, but Montgomery's approach saved thousands of casualties. The debate about aggressive speed versus careful preparation continued, but smokescreen effectiveness was undeniable. Even Patton's advocates acknowledged that if reducing casualties was the objective, Montgomery's approach proved superior. The Rhine smokescreen demonstrated that rejected technologies can prove battle-winning when circumstances align properly. Commanders who dismissed strategic smoke as impractical were proven wrong by successful execution. This reinforced lessons about remaining open to unconventional approaches and not dismissing capabilities without thorough evaluation. Military innovation requires willingness to reconsider assumptions when new evidence emerges. The 66-mile smokescreen remains a record that has never been broken or even approached. No military operation before or since has maintained continuous smoke coverage over such distance for such duration. Modern operations use smoke tactically rather than strategically, in part because modern sensors reduce smoke effectiveness against well-equipped opponents. But against opponents lacking advanced sensors, strategic smoke screening remains viable. The smokescreen also represented psychological warfare's power. By creating uncertainty and preventing enemy intelligence gathering, the smoke magnified Allied advantages and German disadvantages. Germans knew they faced overwhelming force but couldn't determine where to concentrate defenses. This psychological impact was as valuable as physical concealment. Modern military doctrine recognizes that operations affecting enemy decision-making can be as important as operations destroying enemy forces. Today, visitors to the Rhine can stand where the smokescreen operated. The river looks peaceful, with commercial shipping and tourist boats moving along its waters. It's difficult to imagine this quiet scene as the site of history's largest smoke operation, where 200 generators billowed white clouds for 8 days straight, concealing an army and enabling a crossing that hastened World War II's end in Europe. The smokescreen of Operation Plunder teaches that sometimes the best weapon isn't the most destructive, but the most effective. Smoke didn't kill enemy soldiers or destroy equipment, it simply prevented Germans from seeing Allied preparations. That invisibility proved more valuable than additional artillery or tanks. By blinding the enemy for 8 days, the smokescreen enabled a crossing that might have been far bloodier without it. The engineers who operated those generators, the supply personnel who delivered smoke oil, the planners who coordinated the massive operation, they all contributed to victory not through violence, but through deception. They created an invisible wall that an entire German army couldn't penetrate. When that wall finally lifted on March 24, 1945, Germans saw that their defense of the Rhine had already been lost before a single shot was fired in the crossing itself. The battle was won during those 8 days when they could see nothing but smoke.